Hello and welcome to another of PAVE's weekly virtual discussions. My name is Ed Niedermeyer. I am the Communications Director here at Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. We've been throughout the month of October, we've been celebrating Pedestrian Safety Month by looking at pedestrian safety from a variety of lenses. We started looking at sort of some of the short-term opportunities to improve pedestrian and cyclist safety using driver assistance. Last week, we looked at how autonomous vehicle developers are incorporating passenger detection, classification, avoidance into their self-driving stacks. And today we go one step beyond that and look at some of the ways that autonomous vehicles can improve the safety of what are called vulnerable road users, which is pedestrians and cyclists, although I think you can also fit scooters and e-bikes and all the other different sort of micromobility modes that are blossoming now into that category as well. So beyond the stack, right? So our title is Going the Extra Mile, and we really want to highlight, beyond just sort of the core functionality of an autonomous driving stack. What is it that AVs can do to make our road safer for everyone? We have a wonderful group of guests here to discuss this. Very happy to have them all. From Neuro, we have Greg Rogers. Greg, good to see you.
Howdy, thanks for having me.
From GHSA, we have Pam Fischer. And from Important, we have Bastien Beauchamp.
Hello, everyone.
So I would like to start today by sort of setting the stage. And I think it's important, to really, before we talk about the ways that the problems might be solved, to really identify what the problems are here. And of course, who better than Pam Fischer from GHSA to help us sort of understand where are, Pam, right now, you guys look at the data constantly. Sure. You write awesome reports that you can find on their website. Where are the problems with pedestrian and cyclist safety right now, just so we can get a handle on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for everybody to understand that we've done a really great job of increasing safety for occupants in motor vehicles. We've got supplemental safety features and lots of things going on, but we can't say the same for pedestrians, bicyclists, and other vulnerable users out there on the road. So we have to do more to protect these folks. And just a real quick snapshot, I think, of the data that's really important here is if we look at 2009 to 2018, that decade, if you will, we saw pedestrian fatalities jump about 53%. So they've doubled. And if you think about, what's going on, completely unacceptable, number one. But we also have to look at some of the factors related to that. We look at issues with infrastructure itself, lighting situations, vehicles themselves, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But the lighting issue in particular has been a real challenge because we've seen over that same time period that deaths involving pedestrians in darkness has gone up like 67% compared to about 16% during the daytime. And then you also look at locations. Many of these fatalities and the injuries happen at non-intersection locations, okay? People might think it's always at intersections, but it's not. The bicyclist data as well, I mean, particularly I look at, what happened between 2017, 2018. We saw a little more than a 6% increase in fatalities. And that number from that year, it was about 859 bicyclists. That's the highest it's been since 1990. So we're really struggling here with a real problem. One good, I guess if you can say it's good news, piece of news is that the 2019 data showed a slight drop for pedestrians and bicyclists, actually for everybody in terms of fatalities, almost not quite a 3% drop. And for the first half of this year, we're seeing, according to some new preliminary data from NHTSA, we're seeing another about 2% drop across the board. But we're talking about, one death is unacceptable. So we've got to do better here. So we have to think about what's going on. So we have lighting issues. We also have the issue of the size of the vehicle, right? We know that most of these fatalities and injuries involve a collision with a passenger vehicle, a car, and either a pedestrian, bicycles, even an e-scooter and electric bikes and so forth. But we've seen with the uptick in SUVs that it's been tremendously impactful what's going on. So we've seen like the rate of fatalities involving SUVs has gone up like 81% over the past decade, compared to what's happening with passenger cars. So that's disparity in size. You know what's going to happen if there's a collision. The chance of that person surviving is significantly lessened. We also have issues with alcohol, with speeding, a huge problem, distraction. Can't overstate that. It's just a tremendously big problem. And I think the only other thing I'd mention, I think, which is important to kind of help everybody wrap their arms around this, is that we have about 5 to 6 states that are traditionally accounting for the greatest number of fatalities. California, Texas, Florida, Arizona, Georgia, warm weather states, and New York, high population states also. And so the last thing I mentioned is, more likely these incidents are going to happen in urban versus suburban and rural areas. So that's a lot for people to take in, and it's a lot for my fellow panelists to absorb, but I'm sure they know all this. So I'll stop there and see where you want to go with it.
Yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in, I just want to on top of that, this is a massive problem, and it demands all of us to be thinking about this carefully as we look towards, what's the future of mobility? Well, it should be safer for everyone, right? And Angie Schmidt actually published a fantastic book earlier this year called Right of Way. I'm not paid to promote it, but I did think it was fantastic because she didn't bury the lead. In the introduction, the first few pages, she presents it in a really crystal clear way. Every 90 minutes in the US, a person is killed while walking. And we know the patterns, as Pam walked us through. You're most likely to be killed while walking if you're an older person, if you're a person of color, if you're a low-income person, or if you're a person with disabilities. Increasingly, it's light trucks, it's SUVs. These deaths are increasing in the Sun Belt, but it's also happening everywhere. It's most likely to happen at night. But here's the thing. This isn't the board game Clue. We're not guessing whether it's Mr. Green with a candlestick in the library. The call is coming from inside the house. The murders are bloated vehicles and the lack of pedestrian safety standards for vehicles. The killer is hostile roadway designs. It's speeding, it's distraction, it's driving under the influence, and the location of the murders is everywhere, especially low-income communities and communities of color that have been really separated from a lot of decision-making historically, just over decades of the past century. And so it's time to put people over personal vehicles. And I'm hoping that's one of the things that we can emphasize and dig into.
And Bastien, can you just sort of, again, last week we heard a lot about sort of how AV makers are really trying to do as much as they can in their driving stack to address some of these things. But can you just sort of talk about why it might make sense to go beyond that, kind of like, to just set up this conversation a little bit more?
Yes, of course. First, I'd like to say that what I will say is based on the French study made by the Ministry of Transport. It's the first really well defined study on pedestrian fatalities that I've seen. It's really qualitative. They say, for instance, very interestingly, that there's most of the time, there's about 20 scenarios for pedestrian fatalities. And it's always the same 20 scenarios that come back over and over and over again. And if you regroup these scenarios into 4 categories, you get when the driver is responsible, when the pedestrian is responsible, when there's an object blocking the view, and when there's external conditions like Pam mentioned, darkness or weather very heavy weather conditions. These are the 4 categories. And 35% of the cases, the driver is responsible. That leaves 65% of the cases of pedestrian fatalities unsolved, because we have the fantasy as engineers and people in the industry to make the car perfectly reliable. But there's many scenarios where the driver cannot do anything. Even the sensors on the car would not solve the problem. And so for us at Important, we really believe in infrastructures. And we specifically use the cell phone of people to detect people and to have the car and the trucks brake automatically before to hit people based on their phone GPS coordinates. Yeah. So that's the technology we developed. And the need for that is because the V2P approach, the vehicle-based sensor approach has limits. And we don't have the car doesn't have full control on the situation.
And I've got to ask the question though, just understanding that technology, is it providing messaging not only to the vehicle, but a pedestrian is getting a warning that there is a vehicle approaching? Is it working both ways?
Technically, it's possible. It's more a political issue. It's like, will the car provide the coordinates of the car to the pedestrians?
Right.
So will there be a signal from the car to the cell phone?
Right.
But right now, what we do a P2V technology. It's only sending message from the pedestrian to a cloud to predict where the pedestrian is going and send that information to the vehicle, so the vehicle can know in advance, like 1 kilometer, 3 kilometers in advance. So there's no trolley problem anymore. The car is always in control of its speed, and you don't face the trolley problem anymore. So P2V is one thing we promote a lot. We believe in V2I as well. We believe it can solve the pedestrian or bicyclist or even motorcyclist problem. So all the fatalities with motorcycles.
Absolutely. I want to get into some of the connected and just there's such a lot to talk about here. One thing I wanted to really make sure to do to sort of also set this up, and Greg, I'm going to ask you to help me out here, is sort of explaining the concept of what a safety case is, because I think a lot of times people don't understand. There tends to be sort of a focus on one solution or one thing, or even as Greg said, as you said, one problem or one category of problems, and really, safety kind of has to be approached in a holistic way. But you can't just say we're going to be safer on everything. That's when you have to get into making a safety case. Greg, walk us through just what a safety case is and how it sort of applies to this problem.
Yeah, happy to do so. So a quick background on Neuro, for those who might be unfamiliar, we're an autonomous vehicle company. We're developing autonomous vehicles for last mile deliveries. They are custom built. If you don't mind me participating more show and tell, it looks like this. We transport goods exclusively. So there's no room for a human driver inside the vehicle, which means that we're able to take a little bit of a different approach to designing vehicles, to where we're looking at autonomy, of course, as a key way to avoid collisions, but also we need to be taking an approach that adopts redundancies, right? And so right now we're doing deliveries with Kroger and CVS in Houston. We've done 10,000 or tens of thousands of deliveries. And in February, we received the first ever waiver from NHTSA to deploy VR2. And we'll get into some of the design aspects a little bit later, but now look at that baseline. So what is a safety case? A safety case is the argument for why a manufacturer believes that their vehicle can operate safely. The most important question you have to answer is why you believe your vehicle is able to avoid a crash and to drive responsibly, which means paying special attention to pedestrians, of course. And so at Neuro, we're really passionate about this. Our entire business model is focused on driving in neighborhoods, which is where the pedestrians are. And our safety case is, of course, unique since we're focused on protecting who's outside the vehicle rather than what's inside. We're focused on the people outside, not the pizza. We can make you another pineapple pizza. And so we do a lot of testing to build the evidence for the safety case through sort of a three-pronged approach. First, through simulation, the driving system, then through closed course testing, and finally, on-road testing. We actually published a new video today, you can find on Neuro's Medium page, where we put the R2 on public roads in California, Texas, and Arizona this year. And you can see, how our vehicle sort of interacts with the world and with even the narrow streets in Houston. But, another thing to remember is that, safety isn't just about the software. It's about your operations, it's about the vehicles that you're using. Since we own and we operate the vehicles ourselves, that means that, we're able to maintain them, make sure the sensors are clean, and ensure that they're operating safely at any point. And one more thing, because I haven't said the word safety enough, a strong safety culture is really essential. This was a big recommendation from NTSB. And safety is our priority, and it's wired into our DNA at Neuro, and I believe it should be at every company. And one of the things that attracted me to Neuro is one of our core values, our 4 core values, is do the right thing. Coming from a nonprofit, public service background, this is extremely important to me. And this is also where we'll get into vehicle design in a second, I'm sure. how this is often an overlooked factor. You know, we're focused on safe autonomous driving, but we need to be looking at safer form factors overall. And it's the design of our roads and the design of our vehicles that can help us to maximize that.
Yeah. No, and that's a perfect segue. Pam, I wanted to go back to, I know you mentioned some of the truck and SUV sort of large vehicle statistics. But I want to clarify, because there's sort of two potential aspects to this. Is it that large, trucks and SUVs, is that they're hitting more people, like there's a higher number of incidences, or is it a higher number of deaths?
I think it's a combination of, the issue is one of, there are more of these vehicles out there on the road, so there's more potential conflict. But the problem is the vehicle design, how they're built. They sit up higher, and so the contact they make with the body is very different than a more of a sedan, type vehicle. So the impact that it has on the body is far more severe and more likely to be fatal. So we've had, as I said, the uptick in the number of these vehicles out there, coupled with those interactions and having greater exposure, if you will, for the potential for a crash. And in the situation where there is a crash, they're more likely to be seriously injured or killed. That person, outside the vehicle. I think that's important for people to understand. And there has been a call for, how are we designing these vehicles so that they're more forgiving? The bumpers and the way there has to be something to recognize that. It goes back to, as Greg was saying about how we design vehicles, think about not only protecting the people that are inside the vehicle, but those people who are outside the vehicle that may come in contact with them, and that is a huge problem. We haven't done a good job of that.
Right. And so there's an opportunity there with autonomous vehicles, right? Because, you might be able to build vehicles like the Neuro one that Greg was just showing us and talking about, that is, it's small enough that it couldn't fit a person in it if they wanted to, which means, I assume, Greg, that it's small enough, that if it hits someone, it's going to, in a worst case scenario, that it's going to be sort of much less of an issue. What else have you done to, well, first of all, talk about sort of the vehicle design part of this, because I think it's a really interesting, this really illustrates sort of like how much depth there is to understanding all of the different levels of how you build safety into a product like this. And then beyond just the design, what people can see in the vehicle, is there anything else that you sort of done to go beyond that, to provide more of what we call like passive safety? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope you guys will excuse the truck beeping outside here, speaking of, but so we focused on building a neighborhood-friendly vehicle from the beginning. It's custom built. It's to be smaller and lighter, since we're only carrying the things that are needed for the delivery. And since there's no human inside to get impatient or to speed, we help to address really three of the biggest factors behind collisions on the driver's side: speeding, driving under the influence, and distraction. On the design side, we've designed a vehicle that's smaller and narrower. It's about half the width of a sedan, which means we're able to give more room to bicyclists and pedestrians. If you watch the video that we published today, you can see us giving plenty of room to folks on the street while navigating roads that might have, two trucks parked on each side, really narrow neighborhood roads. We also have gullwing doors for our deliveries, so cyclists never have to worry about getting doored again. As a cyclist myself, I'm thrilled about that. And it's kind of like Silicon Valley. It's doors that go like this. For those who aren't familiar with gullwing doors. Also, we've designed a front crumple zone, so the vehicle sacrifices itself, and whatever groceries might be inside, we can replace those in the event of a collision. And right now, for our next generation vehicle, we're researching and testing an exterior pedestrian airbag that protects pedestrian in the event of collision. And we see this as part of our responsibility to ensure that our vehicle is operating as safely as possible, not just on the driving side, but also from the design perspective from the beginning. This is a matter of designing redundancies in the software in the vehicle. And also, another thing that's important too is, cities need to be looking at adopting Vision Zero policies and investing in infrastructure that's going to protect everyone on the roadways, regardless of whether they're driving a vehicle or not. For 50 years, we've been so focused on protecting people inside the vehicle, we've created a perverse incentive to where everyone's making sure their family is safe at the risk of everyone else's families. It's really amounted to a vehicle design arms race. Europe has taken steps on an NCAP program that favors pedestrian safety, and I think the U.S. it's time for us to do so as well here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how this illustrates the sort of, like in cybersecurity, they have a concept called defense in depth, which just means that, at every layer there are defenses, right? So you have defenses in the perception stack and in motion planning and all those sorts of other things that detect and classify pedestrians, that are around. But then, as those potentially fail for whatever reason, there continues to be more layers of safety built into the designs of these vehicles. And I think that's something that's really important to understand, that the companies who are deploying these don't just rely on the AV stack to necessarily always be perfect. And Bastien, that brings us to the product. You've already sort of referenced some of it, but if you could help us understand, first of all, just like specifically, what is the product that, can people go out and get it today? So where is that? And then sort of where in that idea of defense or safety in depth, where does, your product fit into that? Is it more of a safety net? Is it more central and sort of early in that decision making, or in that sort of line of defenses?
A good point. It's definitely a safety net. We see ourselves as a complement to existing technologies. And I would like to answer Matthew's questions right away. It's we detect people on the sidewalk, but we basically send the information to cars when they're in the street. So when they're in the middle of the street, we send the information 10 times a second.
And just his, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure everyone knows his question. If you aren't looking at the Q&A, the question was, if pedestrians are intermittently walking on the side of the road, does the important technology only detect and react to pedestrians it believes it will hit? How much would it slow down while passing a pedestrian?
And now,
I'm sorry.
Now we're talking with OEMs, and OEMs want to have control on the collision system. So we send the information to the car, but the car decides what decision to take, how much to slow down and how much to brake. Everybody wants to limit the full braking at one point. Like, we want a smooth transition. We don't want to cause any accident, just slow down cars if need be. So that was the answer to the question. The need for this technology, and that Pam said the answer is, accidents happen at night in the middle of the street, not at the corners. So of course, sensors on the vehicle are important. Of course, infrastructures are important, but there's many, many scenarios where there's only the pedestrian alone with the car. And the only power the pedestrian has in front of an AV is this, it's a smartphone. Or we're developing as well IoTs, so little devices for kids who don't have phone. So we could think about little hats, little bracelets. For dogs and cats, we could think of collars to protect our pets. But the goal is to go where the sensors don't go. And cell phones, there's no infrastructures to install. It's already there. It's just an update of the cell phone, a software in the cell phone, and a software in the car. There's no hardware to install in the car. So we could bring a layer of safety for pedestrian really quickly by just updating the OS of the phones and updating the software in the autonomous cars.
Yeah, and just sort of, we mentioned that, or we discussed this really briefly in the last one, and like in general, I feel like with all of the connected technology, there's so much opportunity to do things with that on safety and a bunch of other things. But a lot of times it seems like the folks who are developing these systems often I kind of have this mixed feeling about it, where it's like they want to be able to solve the problem completely. And I think one of the questions they have about the kinds of technology that you're talking about is, how do you ensure that everyone has this app on their phone, right? So that you actually detect it. I mean, do you have sort of, do you target this like local deployments and do sort of local advertise? How do you deal with that issue so that the autonomous vehicles can actually, rely on there being a high percentage of the pedestrians actually with this?
Yeah, it's we try to convince OEMs, and then we try to convince the public, and then we try to convince the OEM and the public, and it goes up and up and up. Right now we are a mobile app, but we would like, we reach out to companies so we can be embedded in the phone as standard feature. Yeah. So right now it's more a proof of concept showing that cell phones, especially the new ones, are really precise. The whole system is very fast. It's safety critical. That's the kind of things we're doing right now. And we would like to see that technology implemented in society in 5 years, something like that. Yeah. 3 to 5 years.
And so, you know, I know that you know, Pam was talking about how nighttime, dark weather, poor road lighting is such a big issue. And certainly when talking to AV developers, you hear about occlusion issues all the time with pedestrians. So a pedestrian is hiding, not intentionally, but hiding behind something, and they step out into the road, and you know, you can be very late seeing that. Greg, I'm wondering what is Neuro sort of doing on these issues? Are you looking, I know there's, you know, some different sensor types people talk about, and I'm just, so that specific, addressing that nighttime and dark vision and occlusion sort of issues that Pam was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what's important to acknowledge first is that the good news is that AVs are ultimately going to save lives, regardless of time of day, regardless of location. And that's because robots give us opportunity to see more of the world, to have 360-degree vision, and also this using multiple sensors, multi-modality is what we call it, is essential. Our next generation vehicle is going to have 5 different types of sensors, and 4 of them literally do not rely on visible light and cannot see color. So it'll be LiDAR, radar, thermal cameras, and audio. And being able to have that full 360-degree view all across the driving environment is something that you know, you can't even accomplish with superhuman skills, except for maybe our mutual friend Alex Roy, who might be superhuman. You know, these are important factors to consider, and also, you know, we need to remember too that this does come down once again to street design, to lighting, to our Vision Zero policies, and to what our speed limits are set at. A lot of the times, the reason that a collision is unavoidable is because we've designed streets to be basically highways cutting through our cities. And so we need to be looking at this through a whole system, a safe systems approach, and ensure that we're not, you know, we're not putting the impetus on pedestrians and blaming pedestrians when in fact we've created environments that are hostile to walking in the first place. Let's solve those problems first, is our perspective on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that has to be one of the really important takeaways on this issue throughout the series that we've had. You know, we're an automated vehicle education organization, and so that's what we focus on. And I think there's some really interesting, exciting stuff. You know, you mentioned 5 different sensor modalities. You know, I think sometimes people, you know 3, but 5, like in one vehicle, really, you know, that's fascinating, and that's interesting. And as you say, there's a lot that we can do with that automation, that technology. But you're right, it is fundamentally, there's no silver bullets here, right? Different people might like different parts of, or different solutions more than others, but ultimately it's going to take sort of a collective effort around all of these to really make a difference. I think that's been the you know, one of the really important messages. Pam, I was wondering, you know, we're just about out of time, but if you could just sort of close this off
Sure.
by sort of just, yeah, kind of summing that up a bit.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that give me real hope here. And I'm going to say this not only as a traffic safety professional, but as an avid walker. I walk every day. I'd walk everywhere if I had the ability and the time to do it, believe me. But a couple things that came up that I think are really important. I can't overstate the space issue Greg brought up. You know, the vehicles, neuro vehicles give folks space on the road. We know that separated infrastructure, protected bike lanes, for instance, sidewalks, protect people. So the more space we can give road users, the more everybody benefits, right? And that's number one. I think the other thing is that cell phone. You know, I've got mine. We don't go any place without our cell phones these days. And so being able to leverage this technology in a very positive way to help identify folks that are out there and communicate with each other to say, hey, I'm here, see me, stop, slow down for me, I think is vitally important, and we need to do more in that area. So both of my fellow panelists give me real hope here in so many ways that we're leveraging this technology, and I think that we can make a difference. But it's going to take everybody working together. And until we get there, we're going to have to continue to use those tried and true things. We need to rely, we need better infrastructure. We need to educate all road users about how to work together. We're going to have to enforce the laws, especially our speeding laws, if we're going to protect everybody that's out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would just add to that we really love it when we see folks from cyclist groups and pedestrian groups and urbanist groups coming and joining these virtual discussions, following us on Twitter, reaching out to us. We at PAVE really believe in sort of building those relationships and those connections so that the folks who are, our member companies who are developing this technology really are able to have those conversations so that they're really hearing. And Pam, I think what you just said about having the perspective of not just a researcher, but someone who's out there walking, that really brings a whole other layer to understanding the problem, right? And I think it really was reflected in your fantastic contributions here. So unfortunately, we are out of time. This has been a fascinating and stimulating conversation. And I'd like to thank all of our guests for being here. Pam Fischer from GHSA, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having us.
Greg Rogers from Neuro, thanks for being here, Greg.
Thank you.
And Bastien Beauchamp from Important. Thank you, Bastien.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. And thank you to all of our audience members as well. We appreciate you taking the time to make automated vehicle education a priority. We know that there are lots of demands on your time, and in particular, lots of Zoom calls that you could probably be on. And we really appreciate you making the time for ours. So with that, we have more virtual discussions just about every week here at PAVE. So we'll be announcing a new one tomorrow. It's also sort of on some of these similar issues, but dealing more with sort of autonomous vehicles and first responders. We think you'll find that a really interesting way to understand how AVs interact not just with the city physically, but also with its government and safety agencies as well, since that's such an important part of doing this all safely. So thank you. We hope to see you here again next week, and we'll look forward to that.
Thanks so much.